Today, that gets a new starter.
Alright, let me move the camera so you can see the distances here. The starter and the solenoid are really close to my block hooker headers here. Move that around a little bit so you can see. The distance between the flange on that where the header meets the exhaust pipe and the end of the motor is extremely tight. It's about 1/8 of an inch, so you can see it right there. So we're going to be pulling that out and replacing it with our new high torque mini unit.
So the first thing we got to do is take off this power cable that feeds the starter solenoid, which ultimately feeds the starter. 9/16 nut holds that wire on. Hopefully comes off without backing off the brass one. And yes, I've already disconnected the battery. Oh, come on. There we go. Make that fit. A little more there. There we go. I think it's loose now. Yeah, we got it to come. All right. We'll get that off there, and then I'll show you this bypass kit that I installed that was supposed to fix this heat soak problem. But I guess mine was too severe for it to work. Make sure we don't drop that nut when it comes off. There we go. 1 9/16 nut. Cable comes off. And because I did the bypass on this system, that's going to be the only part that we have to take off electrically. So now we're going to pull the starter out from underneath. Alright, so here we have the flex plate cover off. Well, in my case, I don't have one, so I can't have it off. You get the idea. So now we need to take off the starter. This will require the removal of 2 9/16 bolts. It shouldn't be too torqued on, but let's see. Yeah, it's not bad. Back that one off. Alright, now keep in mind, this thing's pretty heavy, so if you pull it down there without supporting it, you might crush your face or your GoPro. So we're going to be a little more gentle as we take this one out. Oh, perfect. I'll let the weight hang on the bolt a little bit to keep tension on it so I can keep backing it out without the ratchet catching it. Come on. Should be pretty close. Come on. We should be pretty close. Okay, there we go. Get in behind there. Yep, there we go. Perfect. We'll gently lower her down. There we go. Whew. All right. One starter out. So now I'll show you the difference between the one that's going in and the one that we're pulling out right now. Alright, we have the old starter off. Here's our new starter in the box. It's a Summit SUM829000 Summit branded high torque mini starter for small block and big block Chevys.
Inside we get one set of installation instructions, one starter, one set of mounting hardware. Alright, I have the parts bag torn open. We get one set of shims to allow for adjusting the starter depth away from the flywheel, or the flex plate in our case. One bearing shim that would go inside for the pinion if we have to make any adjustments. One extra shim for the backside. It fits around the back of the plate here if we have to have any depth adjustment. And one new set of 9/16 bolts to hold that sucker in there. And a reward for doing a good job getting the old one off first. Now that covers the basics of what you get in the box, so let's get that thing back on there.
Alright, so we're back underneath the Jeep and we're ready to put our new starter on. First thing we're going to do is clean out the old gunk off of the mating surface here. Make sure that it sits good and flat against it. Go. I'm going to grab our new starter. And the mounting surface has two sets of holes drilled in it. One set for each size of our flex plate or flywheel we're using. For our particular one, we're going to use these outer set of holes here. So I'm going to grab our bolts, at least one bolt. Get that in there. Come on. There we go. Get it started. When you wiggle around the starter a little bit, take the pressure off the bolt, make it easier to turn in by hand. There we go. Got enough in there to hold it so we can get our next starter, or our next starter bolt going. There's the hole. There we go. Get it started. There. Alright. We'll grab our ratchet. Get that bolt on there. And as we start to get it tight, we'll switch between sides here, so keep even pressure on it. Starting to get a little snug. And we're going to get it just snug just to start with. That's good. Now we want to check the clearance on our gear on the starter and how it engages with the flywheel or the flex plate. There.
Alright, so it's kind of a tight fit, but the gear does turn freely. I don't feel any interference with it.
So we should be good to finish up our wiring and we'll test her out. Alright, so here's the remote starter solenoid kit that I bought. You might also hear this referred to as a Ford solenoid swap. The idea here is we have our 12 volt constant coming from our battery, plus going out to the rest of our wiring system. We have the ignition switch. This is where our key, when it energizes this terminal, closes across this, which then sends power down this side back down to our starter. And because we had the starter solenoid and the power jumper together at the bottom, once this has power, the starter goes. The idea being that this, being up here away from down where the starter was, would reduce heat soaking issues. As we said previously, that didn't solve it, so we're going to take this back out to clean up the wiring. Nuts off. This would be a neat idea if it worked, but unfortunately in my case, it didn't work. Now we're not going to need this cable at all, so it's going to come out completely. So I'm going to have to back out those metal screws holding it in. And you can see that was just a easy little jumper cable that I had installed just to test and see if this thing would even work. This just goes in the spare parts pile. For me to get that little tiny wire off, I should be using the right size, but the bolt rounder is a lot easier on these little tiny nuts. That off. We're going to run some new wire for that too. Now we can take that solenoid off. Out it comes. So now we need to get our constant 12 volt feed coming from our battery back down to the starter. Alright, so now we need to hook up our 12 volt power from the battery, just the big cable here. Get on that big threaded rod there. There we go. And then we need our constant 12 volt power to the rest of the car. This is used for two reasons. One, it gets power to our fuse box, which ultimately goes up through our key so that we can control our on-off. This is also the wire through which our alternator can recharge the battery, since this is the only way to get power to the battery. Do it carefully. There we go. We'll use that to hold it in place. Our starter comes with a new brass lock washer. and a new brass nut. I'll start screwing this down until we get it snug. Looks good. And then we'll finish off installing it with a 13mm deep socket with a 1/4" drive, because that's some tight space we've got in there between our steering rack and our header. Come on. There we go. And then we'll just gently tighten that down. Because this is brass hardware, you don't want to ream on it too hard, or you'll strip off either the bolt or the nut. So we're just looking for good and snug here. That looks good. Now I need to run a new wire from my ignition switch down to the starter solenoid. Now I would not normally have run a new wire, but the one I have was patched a whole bunch of times, and I don't want to keep dealing with that. So I've run some new, slightly heavier gauge wire. We'll be connecting to the terminal here with the included spade bit. Easy as pie. Alright, a spritz of starting fluid because it hasn't run for a while. Fingers crossed. Oh, that's a bad sound. Alright. Well, we're going to have to go back underneath there and see if there's some sort of a clearance issue with the starting gear. Perfect! Well, unfortunately, real life isn't like TV, and the first time doesn't always work. So we can see that tooth, or the teeth on that starting gear, are just barely touching the side of that flex plate. So we're going to have to install the spacers on the housing, give us a little bit more of a gap there. So out it comes again. Now the whole reason we're doing this is to fix a heat soaking issue with the starter. On this guy, it's so big and long, phrasing, that it's getting really close to the header. And I've got a pair of shorty block hugger headers on that thing, and they're right up against the end of the motor here, and they're awful close to this solenoid as well. The problem is, once those headers get hot, and therefore this gets hot, the magnets inside don't work as well. The hotter you get a magnet, the less powerful it becomes. You get it too hot, you can't get enough torque for this thing to crank over anymore. At that point, you just get a boonk every time you turn the key. It won't actually, it feels like the battery's dead, but it's not. This just doesn't have any magnetism left to crank over that engine. This guy, being a bit smaller, is going to give us more of an air gap between the back. So line them up here. We have a bit more of a gap between here and where the header is. And the unit is also going to be a little bit further away from the pipes at the solenoid as well. You can see on my old one, where I installed this bypass jumper here, the idea was if it's a voltage drop due to heat, this makes sure that the solenoid always gets maximum power from the battery, and then this is switched from the remote solenoid up on the firewall. In my case, this didn't solve the issue, so either this is just getting too hot to work at all, or the issues in the motor itself, either heat killing the magnets, or it's reducing the tolerances on that bearing and it's seizing up. Either way, the heat's what's killing it. It's been a good starter. It's actually lasted me 16 years. It's a factory style OEM. If you go to AutoZone, this is what they're going to give you. So rereading the directions here, we can see ring gear clearance. The starter pinion gear to flywheel ring gap must be approximately 1/8 of an inch when the pinion is in its relaxed position. A smarter man would have read that before he put it on the first time. Alright, we have our starter back out. So now we need to pull off this mounting plate so we can install our new shims and bring that gear depth in just a little bit. That's held on with a 5mm hex key. And then these two screws. That one wasn't too bad. So now our top plate should come off. There we go. You can see it brought the original shim with it, so we're going to put that back. We're going to add our new shim. And then the other shim for top of the bearing here. And when the top goes back on, you can see these three bigger holes here. They're going to line up with this outside hole. Gently. And you can see we've got some adjustment here. So if you need to clock the starter to clear either parts of the engine, headers, other accessories, whatever, you do have a little bit of adjustment there. In my case, I know we're fine just right where it's straight up, so we're going to leave it there. Straighten that out just a little bit before we crank it down. That's good. Put our screws back in. Make sure those are good and tight. There we go. Now you can see we're sitting not quite as far out of there now that we have the two shims. So that should give us the space that we need to clear that flex plate. So now we're done with that. Let's get it back on the car. So looking at the gear here, we can see a few places where the ring gear was rubbing on this flex plate while it was turning before, making that terrible sound. It doesn't look like it's done too much damage. It should survive. Yeah, we'll just let it ride for now. But that's why you check your tolerances. So hopefully you can see we've got a little bit more of a gap there now. So hopefully that should fix our tolerance issues. So let's get the wiring back together and crank it up and see what happens. All right, time for round number 2 test. There goes nothing. Would help if you hook up the battery. All right, let's see if our hard work paid off. It's alive! Alrighty. Well, we got a fuel leak, so let's take care of that. Well, it's been idling for about 15 minutes now. Should be good and hot. Engine's up to temperature. Let's kill it and see if the starter will crank over again. That seems to have worked pretty well. Let's get it back in the garage. Alright, thanks for watching my video. Hopefully you had a few laughs at my expense. I hope to be doing lots more of these videos. I have 3 different Jeeps in various states of disrepair that need lots of work. So I should have plenty of material for you. If you have any feedback, good or bad, or you just want to tell me I'm an idiot, feel free to do so in the comments below the video. We will see you next time.